I cannot wait to get into a topic that honestly, I'm going to give all the credit to my partner here, Harry Hollins. Um, and it's about hope, it's about optimism, but it's about the difference between the two, knowing the difference between the two, and actually thinking of hope as a strategy. I'm Joelle Martinez, President and CEO of the Latino Leadership Institute, again joined by Harry Hollins, our Chief Strategy Officer. Good morning, Harry.
Good morning. Good morning. Looking forward to this discussion. This is
It's all your
perfect
fault.
timing.
I mean, truly, honestly. And you know, you gave a quote the other day, and it got us thinking. And then both of us just started talking about why we need to talk about hope and optimism a little bit more. And I know we've talked about this in the past. Music's really important to both of us. I think we really find music both spiritually and energy and all of these things. So when you think about a song, and you know, what is your go-to song right now when you need a little hope and a little optimism? I want to know what's on your playlist, and I want to know the song you're jamming to when you need that little pick me up.
Oh, it changes and it rotates, and I have one, and you'll have to stay with me a second because you work with me long enough. This is going to be a direct line, and I know how my brain works. And it's a complex and it's a nuanced song, but especially here from the West Coast of the United States, it'll really resonate. So it's Kendrick Lamar, and it's Squabble Up, and I'll tell you why. If you've seen the video, there's a part of the video where he makes a reference to Chicano culture, and you see our Chicano brothers and sisters dancing, and it's about West Coast hip hop. But I heard an interview with him, and he said it was his way of celebrating the tapestry of the Black and Hispanic culture and heritage. And you know me well enough that speaks to me because of who and what I am, but it also speaks to me about this power of unity and this power of coming together. And so I always think about just the collective power of the communities, to the extent they're even separate communities, which is a different discussion, but just that idea. And I think about that power, and I even take it a step further. I've said this: if we put Latinas and Black women in one room, game over. I guarantee nothing but dynamite's coming out of there. So this all kind of relates to that song, and so I come at it at a convoluted way, but I hear it and I see the celebration of the unity, and I think of the power of the unity, and that gives me hope. So I come in a different way. I know you'll have one that makes much more sense than mine.
No,
so what about you?
No, that totally makes sense knowing you, because you know the work is hard, and sometimes it's really days are harder than others. So it makes total sense to me, one, that Kendrick would be on your playlist, and two, that any song that references unity and bringing two communities I know you love and care so much about together, not just because it makes you feel good, but because you know that's the source of power. Like, it totally makes sense to me. That Squabble Up, and now it's in the back of my head, by the way. I will spare everyone my rapping, though. I truly will. So I think that's really important. We're going to get to that. We're going to come back to that. Like, what is it that gets us going, and why is that so important when thinking about hope and optimism? Yeah, my song's not too different in a way. Anyone that knows me knows I'm a big fan of Pitbull, and got to work with him back in my old days, and just really inspiring. And during COVID, he wrote the song, I Believe That We Will Win. And it actually was my daughter's soccer team that would play it before any of their games. And it was the line that says, when things get tough, that's when we show up. And I think that is so reflective of the community, of who we are, of our allies that stick in it, that when things get tough is not when we back down. And he repeats over and over again, I believe that we will win. I believe that we will win. And I think that repetitive nature of the song is what's so powerful, because we have to remind ourselves over and over again that change is possible, that success is within reach, And then particularly when things are difficult, we got to say it over and over again in our head. So for me, we left a meeting that was, kind of an intense meeting and a difficult meeting. And I shared that, like, right now, the song I'm going to play is I Believe That We Will Win. And you said,
I
great,
love it.
I'm listening to Squabble Up.
I love it.
So I love it. I love it. But let's get into that. So that's the framework that, first of all, we just acknowledge that there's something about mentality meeting strategy that's so important for the moment, and also acknowledging the role that emotions play in leadership in general, especially when things are really difficult. And so we decided to talk about optimism and hope today, and really want to make sure we know the difference between the two, because I think, Harry, even in the quote that you've been sharing, we bring these two together and treat them as they're one and the same, and they're not, right? Optimism is a mindset. It's tied to positive thinking, and you just have an expectations for outcomes. Whereas hope, still, you have a positive mindset, but unlike optimism, hope requires activation. It requires you to do something. So if you're hopeful, you believe in something, but then you work towards it. If you're optimistic, you believe in something and just hope it's going to happen, right? So, and those are the two differences. So tell me a little bit how one, the quote that you shared with me that started the whole conversation going, and we wanted to bring it up. Tell me how you relate those two terms and what those terms and differences mean to you.
For me, like, I started even at its core being English major, right? That optimism's a noun, and hope is a noun, but it's also a verb. So there's an action part to it. And the way I always thought about it, and I'm not going to use, because you can look, you look it up and you read and you get all these kind of different definitions for the two. The analogy for me, and it'll go to my sports days, and I think that the timing's perfect coming out of the NCAA tournament. Congratulations to Connecticut, even though they upset. Well, they didn't upset. They're great. They beat South Carolina. I'm a big South Carolina and Don Staley fan. But I looked back and I said, South Carolina played Tennessee Tech in the first round. Arkansas State played Connecticut. And I have a feeling if you would have talked to the Tennessee Tech and Arkansas State fans and said, are you optimistic you can win? If you go by what optimism means, probably not, because optimism is when you feel like there's a good or a likely chance of a good outcome.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But if you said, do you hope you could pull the upset? Yes, but it would be followed with what would have to happen. You would have to play almost a flawless game, probably shoot 60% from the field. You'd have to do something kind of extraordinary, but it's you could do it. It is possible. And to me, that hope, that part that you have to act to make something happen, is what is the difference to me from optimism, where you feel like this just could happen because of the position that I'm in. So I love kind of that action piece of it. But that's, to me, kind of think of that as a sports analogy, but there's a lot of different ways people think about it. I mean, how do you think when you hear those words? Because they're used interchangeably all the time.
All the time. Like you looking at, the noun versus the verb, but I look at the practical. If you hear me give my keynotes or I'm talking, I talk about hope as a strategy, but I also provide it with some tangible ways of actually implementing it. Hope, to me, is the combination of knowing your why. And I say it in my keynotes that, if you know your why, you're going to find your way. And that's not my quote, Maxwell, said that. And I really, truly believe that hope is the combination of knowing your why, understanding and believing with just a clear vision where your destination is going to land. What is the outcome you're trying, and then you build in the hows. And when you have hope, you have all three of those things. You have your why, your purpose, you know what you're driving towards, and you have ideas or plans to get there, right? And that's when I know I have hope. When I'm optimistic, right, when I'm feeling a sense of optimism, I probably don't have all three of those. Maybe I have one of them. Maybe I just have the why. I know I need to do this because, but I don't have the clarity of those other things. That's how I know I'm just in an emotional state. That's how I'm just maintaining, but I don't have a plan forward, or I don't have clarity of that. And so I haven't gotten into the hope. And the example that I can give when I knew I was leveraging hope as a leader was during the COVID years. I mean, thinking back to 5 years ago, almost to the date, our in-person program was having to move virtually in less than a couple of weeks. I had lost my grandmother to COVID. My team was all virtual, and there was so much uncertainty in the world. But I knew at the end of the day that the purpose of the organization was not fading, and in fact was probably more important than ever. I also never lost sight of the outcomes that we were trying to do. And where I knew I had hope is because we were able to put into motion ideas, plans, innovation in order to keep things going. So I did not get stuck on just being optimistic that everything would work out. I knew in that moment of what would seem a hopeless moment that hope actually still existed in the organization, because we knew our why, we could see the future, and we had ideas to move it forward. That's hope. That's where hope is a strategy. I know you've had a long and successful career. When has hope been a strategy, and can you give us examples of it in your own career?
I think there's a lot of different, I think the kind of the theme in my career is the hope to me has always been that bridge between the why, the where you're going, but the action to get you there. Mm-hmm. So for me, in kind of my experience, it's never been that you could sit there and think it was going to happen. Optimism came after the work, and the work was the action. And then if you kept doing enough work, to me, optimism started to come in. First, it was the hope. The hope is if I keep doing this, something good is going to happen from it. And then after you keep doing that and you're over and over and you put in the work, to me, you start to step back and I start to feel like there's some optimism here. Mm-hmm. But you had to get out and you had to do something. And I won't even get to a single incident, but whether it's career, whether it's even for me participating in certain protests around something that meant something to me, just that act of getting out there, doing something felt like it could, it may be small, but it is a difference. It is true that every single person has power. And even if you think it may take a collective of a lot of small steps, but it's still taking steps.
Yeah.
I've never been able to feel comfortable sitting and thinking I'd be optimistic because an outcome could just happen.
Yeah.
And not that that's right or wrong. I've just never been able to sit there. I have to get out and participate in some way. And to your point on the why and to where you're going, that's the bridge. This is what outcome I want, or we want, or the community wants. But I'm not going to sit there and say that's going to happen. What do we have to do to get to that outcome?
So what are examples? I know that about you. I think that's what makes you such an effective leader. What are examples today? And I would love to also hear this from, folks listening, like what are some of those examples of hope right now that you're seeing, right? Because those that are blending, a mindset plus adding the activation into it that make a difference. What are some tangible examples of that you're seeing today?
Yeah, I think today, and I'm going to use it, and this is not to, people can be on different sides of the why here. If I'm going to what is actually taking place, I think about, we talked earlier about leveraging economic power, mm-hmm. and there are boycotts taking place today. That's mm-hmm. just fact. And I just got an update on the boycotts, and I know that part of it was those who did not agree with the rollback of DEI, who want that put back in, and they have some other asks. Part of leveraging their economic power was, I'm not going to shop and spend money at your store anymore. Yeah. So you want to tie it to like common day, what's happening now. Traffic at Target's down 7 million people through March. Mm-hmm. Costco, on the other hand, is a company that decided we not only agree with DEI, we're going to double down on it. Their traffic is up 7 million to this day. And so depending on, and I said, you have to decide where you feel on that issue. But if you feel on that issue that DI is valuable, it should be there, I value diversity, equity, and inclusion, And my action is going to be things that I can do and control, and I can decide how and where I spend my money. And you
Mm-hmm.
are absolutely seeing the impact there. And whether it's Tesla, whether it's X platform, the data is the data, and the fact is the fact that there are those have decided I am actually I hope you change the direction you're going, and my hope is going to be backed up with my action, and my action is going to be what I do with my wallet, and then we'll see. And we're in the midst of these now, and these are some of the very early reports that have come out, but that's a present day example today.
Yeah. Yeah, because it's you have an opinion, you have a vision for what the future, you know your why, and you take action. That's the hope, right? That's it. And then you can start to see the impacts and the outcomes. And that, I think that's a perfect example of using an economic position and leveraging some economic power. And I see it. And regardless of what the issue is, are you going to do something about it becomes the big question, right? And that's the big test of whether or not you are still hopeful, or whether or not you're digging into hope is, are you willing to do something about it? And if so, what? And that was the big question. So in that case, not happy with the decisions. Okay, well, are you still going to shop there? You're going to change your shopping patterns. That can be inconvenient for you, but are you willing to do that? And I think as leaders, particularly when it's hard, and when we've got to navigate the moment, sometimes those are the self-reflection questions we need to do on our runs, in our quiet space, where we're saying, is there enough there, right, to keep me going? Do I have both the why and the where I want to go? And am I willing to do the work? That's a big question, I think, for a lot of leaders. When I think of this question about where I find hope right now, and it's funny because we were just talking about this off camera, and I said the opposite, but I do go to my kids often, not all kids in general, but I do get hope in my kids, because I see them wanting to do things differently and better and take action, and I have a sense of accountability to whatever future they inherit. And so when I see them being part of the solution, and when I recognize that I am also part of the solution, I think that's where I keep going. That's where I'm hopeful. And the second example I will give beyond my children is collaboration. You talked about this in Squabble Up, but I'm working with this amazing group of Latino and Latina leaders from across the country right now that are all navigating different things. And I would say for the first time, maybe ever, but definitely in decades, I see a lot of leaders coming together, working, problem solving. And that kind of effort is where I really dig in with the hope. People are really leaning in. And I think that's what Sum It Up was supposed to be about too, is that we got to be in this together. And Sum It Up gives me hope, because if we can have conversations and bring people together, then we can do more. And I think that's definitely, that's where I'm seeing it, is in the work that goes on. Why do you think though people need to hold on to optimism? Like, what role, if hope is a strategy, why is it also important not to let chaos, failure, fear, like, why does optimism also play an important role for you as a leader?
I think I almost think about the fruits of the labor to be optimistic. And I think it's important because almost it allows you, to me, once you've done the work, you can kind of like step back a little and be optimistic because you've put in all the work and you have things in motion and you're trying to drive to an outcome, and whatever that outcome is that you've decided. And to
Mm-hmm.
me, like, optimism is the dessert to me. Like, I love to feel optimistic because I know the work has been put in. And it's almost like it's the gratitude behind it. So I smile, I gleam up. I love to feel optimistic. I can't get to optimistic unless I've addressed this hope and action piece first. And then I
Mm-hmm.
love to get there and say, okay, step back. I actually think there's a lot of action. A lot of people are doing things. They're taking steps. They're using their voices. They're using their platforms. I'm optimistic something could happen because we have a lot going on out there. And that's how I think about it. I know you've talked a lot about, and it's interesting that you asked the question, because when I didn't think about it at first, that well, there has to be a role for optimism too. It's not like you're saying never be optimistic. So, I reverse back to you. How do you think about where optimism plays when it actually is, when you need it, and when it's beneficial?
Yeah. I think it's actually quite simple, at least for me. If I'm not optimistic about something, again, optimistic is an emotion, it's a mindset, it's a feeling. Sometimes it's instinctual, sometimes it's data informed. But if I don't have optimism, then I'm not in the right space. I'm not doing what I need or should be doing. Something is off, right? If I've really lost my optimism. So optimism for me is a tell. It really is. It's a filter of, if I'm not feeling it, then I really have to ask, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? And if I'm missing those pieces on the why, the what, and the how, then I'm all out of sorts, and then I'm not a good and effective leader. I do think too, it's important to know when I don't have optimism, is it because I'm pessimistic, or I tend to be in the realist frame of mind, which is probably why hope resonates with me as a strategy. And so I also have to test that. Like, if optimism isn't there, is that because something is off or something is missing, or there's a fact that tells me that I shouldn't be optimistic, or is it because I become so pessimistic? And when I become so pessimistic, then I all but stop in my tracks. And there is no chance of hope, because how are you going to apply activation to something that you really don't believe in?
Yeah.
And for me, that belief, that why, that clarity of purpose is so critical. And that's why optimism is a good test of decision making, of the path that you are on, of your impact as a leader. Because if you are not optimistic, then you have a lot of answers, questions that you need to answer, and that's what it means for me.
So, Joe, but I want to continue on that really important point you raised. When you're not optimistic, and you could be headed to being pessimistic, how do you not stay there? How do you get yourself out of staying there? Because you can get stuck there, and then that can become a very kind of hard, dark place to just stay in pessimism. We all have been there. We all been there. But how do you not stay there? How do you get yourself out of there?
I think, like you, I'm so action oriented. So I don't think I would let myself get stuck in a pessimistic state, because I would either have to take the steps to change and alter, to pivot. I'm not afraid of pivoting. I'm not afraid of changing course. I'm not afraid of admitting mistakes. I'm not afraid of recognizing when things just aren't, where they need to be. And so I think for me, I can't stay in a pessimistic state for long, because I have to put some action to the table. But I think right now I've really been mindful of feeling down and feeling less optimistic than I typically would. I mean, the times are really difficult for many of us as leaders, and it's really hard not to get into all the negatives right now. And I have to run. I have to get outdoors. I have to have really meaningful conversations with really smart people. Again, I have lists of things I have to do. And sometimes the list includes changes that I have to make. Yeah. Right. And but we can't allow ourselves, again, hope for me is agency.
Yes.
And so if I allow the pessimism to take over, then I give away my power and I give away my agency. And so that's where hope comes in as a strategy. So hope is the strategy that I deploy when I am so pessimistic, because I got to put those things, because that's the agency I have. If we stayed in a state of pessimism, then, we'd be like, what are we all doing here? So I think that's it. I see so many amazing things, and you are the barrier. So goals, having solutions, collaborations, all of those components coming together. You know, when we think of what fuels and sustains actions, I would turn the question over to you. I'm seeing collaboration. I'm seeing, I'm coming from the bottom, now I'm up. So I guess now I'm quoting Drake in this as well. But, for you, how do you maintain? How do you avoid getting negative, pessimistic? What are you doing? What are those tools?
Where I go, and I think Frank in the comments said it. He said, would we say our parents and abuelito and abuelitas, would they be optimistic or pessimistic? And I go to history, and I know I talk about, and you talk about this a lot, Joel, the shoulders we stand upon. And you know how literal I am. And I think of visuals. Literally, when I get pessimistic, I say, what if Cesar Chavez walked in the room and looked at me? What if Dr. King walked in the room and looked at me? What if Russell Means walked in the room and looked at me? They were all about action. They were clear on the what and the why. None of the great leaders that we talk about, the shoulders we stand on, stayed in pessimism that long. And it's to the point, and then you think about our grandparents and our great grandparents, and you put that in perspective. I don't feel I have the right to stay in pessimism that long. And to me, visually, if I have to look them in the eyes, that'll get me out of pessimism really, really fast.
I'm seeing some coming about attitude and family. It's like it's in our DNA, right? I don't think we as a community are ever ones to just sit back and stay pessimistic, not do something to change outcomes. I think we are some of the most positive, forward-thinking individuals and leaders and people. I think we'll do the work. We're not afraid to do the work that's required. And I think that's our superpower. Hope could just be our superpower, combined with the why, the what we're trying to actually achieve, and then putting some action plans behind it in a collaborative way. I think that may be just in our DNA. Thinking about our ancestors, thinking about, my great grandparents that didn't even have, middle school education and yet lived such a full life with so many contributions, and were some of the most hopeful and optimistic people I've ever known, right? They didn't have a lot, but yet they had an abundance mindset, and they always wanted more. They always thought for the future, forward thinking, future thinking. If we think about our ancestors, if we think about those people, I think that's what they had in common. And I think this moment that we're all leading in and navigating in, like, that's our call to action. Yes. We have to be more hopeful now than ever. And I think that for me is why when you gave the quote, and I don't know if you have it available and you want to share it again, but that's why when you said that to me just a week or two ago when we were going through some decision making, this topic was so personal for me.
Yeah, I forgot, and I'll paraphrase it, but it was a powerful quote. It essentially said that optimism requires no courage. It's a very strong statement. It said courage is required and part of hope, because hope requires action. So they said it's not, so it's a really, really powerful quote. And I think it was, and I forgot, it was a rabbi who said that. And it's very powerful, and it always kind of stuck with me. And not that there's not a place for optimism, like we said, but I think there's, I think of everything you said, our ancestors from the civil rights movement, everything was centered and built around action. And you and I've gone back and looked at the great leaders, and a number of times they use the word hope to optimism, and it's about a 10-1 ratio. It is hope, hope, hope. But behind that hope and driving that hope, something was done, some action was taken. And that's why I think it's just so powerful. And I think they both have their place. And I will say, I would love to see more. Like, I think we need more action in our community. We need more, whatever it may be. It's not telling people where to believe or what to say, but I do believe what you said, that it's woven into our DNA. It's just part of the core of who we are. And I think the more It is, and even if it comes from different places and different angles, that's good. It drives conversation. It drives to a better outcome. So it's not telling you what lane to play in, but I do think we need a lot more movement in the lanes, and I think that can drive to a lot of good outcomes.
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna sum it up and then ask you to close us out. But I think where you ended it is where I was inspired the other day. That optimism doesn't take courage because it doesn't require action. And what we need now more than ever are courageous leaders, right? Courage to step in, courage to act, courage to speak up, courage to collaborate, courage to keep going, to continue the summit. And for me, when you said that to me as a partner, as a team member, as a thought partner, as a leader, I needed to hear that. I needed to hear that leadership today requires courage, and that leadership today requires hope, and that we have to get to work and continue the work. And I just want to thank you, not just for bringing it up for me and reminding me of that, but opening up today's conversation. So my sum it up is that leadership today does require more courage, more hope, more collaboration. And I'm just really grateful to be in a space where we get to do that day in and day out with a great team and a great community and bring that to light. That's what this conversation has meant to me. But you were the guy who brought it to me in the first place. So why don't you sum it up for us today? Optimism, hope, the difference, and why it matters.
I think we're in a moment where action is going to be required to drive any kind of change to the extent you want change to occur. And I do think what you point out in the courage, to sum it up, the courage is real, and sometimes courage also means there's risk involved. And I only bring that up to say the more we have courage as a community, you kind of it's less risk when you have the power of the unity and the numbers. And then so to me, kind of that summing it up is back where we talked about there's power in unity, there's power in numbers. If we're more courageous together, it makes it much more easy to be courageous for others to be courageous. And I think it starts a wheel, and it really starts momentum. And I'd sum it up there, just like challenging all of us to be more courageous. And the more of us are courageous, it makes it easier for other people to be courageous.
No better way to sum it up. Thank you all for joining us today. Please stay connected with one another. Let us know what you'd like us to talk about next, and we will be responding to comments here shortly. Thank you all for joining us today. Take care.
Have a good day. Bye.